Think is going to happen from Mr. Cameron's charm offensive, from this trip that he's making at the moment? Will anything come of it?
Well, I think it's absolutely essential, because if you look at the substance of the reforms that the UK has put forward, they're very much in the interest of the EU as a whole. But of course, on tone, there needs to be an improvement. And of course, even though Juncker visited with Cameron yesterday, Juncker is not the key power player, it's other European leaders. So I think it's essential that Cameron does this, because of course the other European leaders involved in this negotiation have to sell it to their own domestic electorates. And given the reputation Britain has in the EU, sometimes of being a difficult partner, sometimes this reform agenda is termed as though it were a case of British exceptionalism rather than reforming for the sake of saving Europe. I think it's essential that Cameron gets the tone right with other European leaders.
Yeah, because precisely on the point, I mean, many would say that leaders haven't really listened to Cameron in the past, so why should they listen now? I mean, what's there to change their minds this time around, and which particular leaders in specific, or which particular countries is it that Cameron really has to work hard to get on his side?
Well, I think the challenge that Cameron has now, as I mentioned already, on the substance of reform, there is already a lot of economic and political reforms. Cameron already has a lot of support from certain countries. However, the challenge he has is to wrap it up and present his program as though it were in the European interest. And of course, we, coming from a pro-European, pro-reform think tank, believe that these reforms are necessary. But in terms of who Cameron needs to work hard to convince, obviously Angela Merkel is a key player, as we hear again and again whenever it comes to Europe, and other kind of liberally economic countries, the Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark. These are important countries he needs to get on side.
Is there any chance actually that some of the reforms that the UK will be asking might not be approved as an exception for the UK, but actually as a reform for the EU as a whole?
Oh, absolutely. So we've set out all the reforms that are on the table in our reform index. And if you look at them, you know, broadly speaking, on the economic reforms, things like strengthening the single market in services, cutting red tape, striking trade deals with the rest of the world, these are all things that we think, you know, are going to benefit the EU as a whole. And that is where Cameron really has to work hard to push his reform agenda.
If the talks fail, or if nothing solid comes of the talks, does that mean that we move a step closer towards a potential Brexit becoming more of a reality?
Oh, absolutely. I think so. We've assessed, you know, the chances of Brexit, and we've currently put it on about 20% after the election. So it is a non-negligible threat, and I think the rest of Europe knows that. Having said that, I think Cameron is coming into these negotiations with a strong hand. Clearly, he has a strong democratic mandate as the election, you know, a surprising Tory Conservative-led government, and he's one of the strongest leaders in Europe now. Aside from Angela Merkel, when we see politics splintering, he clearly is coming into these negotiations with a strong negotiating hand.
And where in particular is it that you think that Europe needs to restructure, or that the UK needs to restructure?
Well, I think you can perceive the reforms in two broad categories. The economic reforms, which I already discussed, you know, free trade deals, becoming more open to the rest of the world, cutting some of the red tape, regulating less but regulating better. And then some fundamental democratic reforms, such as ensuring that national parliaments are the ultimate source of authority rather than Brussels. But the big challenge is to take this reform agenda and wrap it up in some kind of institutional framework whereby the EU, the basis of EU membership becomes the single market, and all the other things you decide to opt into. So it's a club with flexible membership rather than a club going towards ever closer union, because we already know that countries like the UK, Sweden, Poland, you know, either won't join the euro or will take a long time to join the euro.